Hello, welcome to my channel. This is Susie Marsh-Meffin. I'm in Florida and this is my meditation room. And today we're going to talk about the 12 steps and how you can use them for anything. And I'm going to be using a book from Narcotics Anonymous to talk about their 12 steps. But I really want to describe how you can use the first 3 steps to really overcome almost anything. And really, if you can overcome alcoholism, and AA still has, and NA still has the best rates, recidivism rates than treatment centers and anything else does. So it's based on the fact that you have to have a spiritual experience, conversion experience, in order to be able to stop craving and in order to be able to give up the addiction or the problem or the issue, which you may be looking at this for the issue. The first step says we admitted we were powerless over whatever the problem is: obsessing, depression, a conflict with somebody else's alcoholism or drug addiction, somebody else's mental illness. So you can use the first 3 steps for actually all the 12 steps for anything, any problem at all. And the first step is divided into 2 steps. If you're looking at drug or alcohol addiction, the first half of the step measures the frequency and sort of the scientific diagnosis of addiction. And really, if you look it up as a therapist, we use the Diagnostic Statistical Manual to make a diagnosis, and that's the first half of the first step, which is admitted we were powerless over our addiction or our problem. And the second half is, and our lives had become unmanageable. Usually, if it's not a problem, your life is not going to become unmanageable. So again, if you have a problem with obsessing, maybe it's interfering with you at work because you're thinking about what you're obsessing about. Maybe you've gone back into the house 3 times to check the locks, check the doors. Maybe you had a conflict and you can't stop thinking about what you should have said or what they said to you and how it made you feel. So the anxiety, panic, there's lots of ways to deal with this. When I had anxiety attacks, probably a couple of years after I got off of drugs, I made myself at one point just sit with the anxiety and see what happened, because an anxiety and a panic attack will tell you that something terrible is about to happen. So I forced myself to lay on my bed and have a complete anxiety attack, which is not as bad as a panic attack, and really prove to myself that nothing bad was happening, nothing was going to happen. I mean, I did eventually get on medication because I'm ADHD, but that way the anxiety or a panic attack does not have as much power as it does when it's telling you in your brain that you're going to die or you're going to go crazy, because you're not. And you have to fight that fear by going through it. And also, if you have a panic attack, it usually tells you you're having a heart attack, and sometimes people end up in the emergency room and they'll say it's just a panic attack, but it can feel life and death and threatening. So the first step I like to split in half when I'm working with a client. We admitted we were powerless over. And first, if it's an addiction, I look up the diagnostic manual for that addiction, and I rate the frequency, the amount, the duration. I go through each year that they were using drugs or drinking and see if there was frequency change, if there was tolerance change. Usually addiction tolerance change will go up and then it will go down. I remember I had a friend who in college was a longtime drinker, and one day she could have 10 beers and not even feel high at all or drunk, and another day she could have 2 beers and publicly wet herself because she couldn't control the alcohol, and that's some of the signs of late alcoholism. So that's pretty serious. So I rate the duration, frequency, control, and amount used, when the amount changed. So it takes a while. It takes about 40 minutes to do that assessment, but it's very helpful. It is very helpful to me, and especially if they bring in a spouse, it's very helpful to the spouse. So that's the first half of the first step. I must be addicted, or this must be a serious problem for me. So then the second half of the first step says our lives had become unmanageable. Then next to that column of drugs that they did and what age they were doing, or alcohol, then I put how their lives became unmanageable. And I've said this before in another video. You have to look at physically, so with drinking, did their liver enzymes become messed up, or do they have cirrhosis, or with drugs, any physical problems, car wrecks, anything like that, any medical, physical problems, any psychological problems, and that means emotional or spiritual problems. And spiritual problems did, like I went, when I did drugs, I went from being a Catholic, maybe a Jack Catholic, which we call Catholics who don't go to church or mass, but I believed in God, to becoming an atheist, so I didn't have to answer to a higher power. So that was a spiritual side from the addiction. So did you change spiritually? Did you stop going to church? Did you stop believing in a higher power? Did you think of yourself or your addiction as the higher power, and that controlled you? That's like a drug can be your higher power. And then we get and go financially. How did you pay for the alcohol, drugs? How did you pay for what you're obsessing about? And financially, I guess if you're having a problem with anxiety, you may have to pay for doctor's visits to get some Xanax, which is not good at all for anxiety and panic attacks. Occasionally it can work with some clients, but many times it becomes extremely addictive, and it is contraindicated for the elderly. Just so that you know, contra means it is not indicated for the elderly. The rest of the half of the first step goes from physical, mental, emotional, mental, spiritual, social, work, school. There's about 4 more other places where I check when I do a checklist off of the first step. But I go through each year when they were using and how they had more and more consequences, and because usually the consequences got worse. So you can do this for mental illness. I've really thought many times it'd be great to have a bipolar anonymous group, but I don't know, not many people think it would be helpful. So whatever the issue is, you want to look in the first step how you are craving it, obsessed with it, how you are using it despite work. You're having problems at home, you're having conflict and problems spiritually, financially, etc., etc., etc. So that's the first step, is how has it affected you over time? And I really, really make it into minute details, especially for sex addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, any substance addiction, or process, like sex addiction, I guess would be called a process addiction, relationship addiction, codependency, with caretaking addiction, those kinds of things. And it's a little bit harder to do a first step with codependency, but you can try. The second step says, we came to believe, and I forgot the first step also says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Now, AA and NA have some literature that you can read about the second step, that really helps you understand going from truly believing that you have a problem. And part of that's so important because people with drugs and alcohol will not surrender to that problem until their face is on fire. They just don't really surrender until they have nowhere else to go. Treatment didn't help. They're left with nothing. So the second step is, can we believe that higher power can restore us to sanity? Now, sanity in this case means doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Running your head into a wall over and over. I'm just going to drink this much today. Oops, I drank 12 drinks. I'm just going to look at porn for 10 minutes today at work, and so ends up being an hour. Whatever the issue is, I'm not going to steal again, and then I end up stealing. So the second step is precursor to turning your will and your wife over to a higher power. It is when you think about what your higher power might be and whether or not you think it could restore you to sanity. You haven't been able to do it. Your friends haven't been able to teach you how to do it. Your mentors probably haven't been able to teach you how to do it unless you're in a 12-step program and they've done it themselves. But coming to believe that maybe a higher power, and it says higher power because we don't want to say Jesus, because there's Jews in 12-step programs and there's Muslim people in 12-step programs. We want to say higher power so that you can have your higher power. Now, part of the second step is to think about a higher power and thinking about a higher power. And then in the third step, we say we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So to me, when that happened to me, I had to examine what a higher power meant to me, because I was raised Catholic and I was really raised on a fear basis. So I looked at my list of the characteristics of a higher power, and they were pretty negative and abusive and not friendly, not loving, not helpful, and it really was not the kind of higher power that I wanted. So that third step prayer and the second step prayer that's prepping us for the third step says, take a look at your higher power and where you learned it. And I would promise you, if you write down on a piece of paper all of the negative aspects of your higher power that you believe, judgmental, destroying people, not allowing certain people in heaven, angry God, rageful, resentful, jealous, however you see the negative aspects of your God, your higher power, write all those down, and then think about the earliest time in your childhood and who in your life had those qualities and characteristics. So who had those qualities? Read them to yourself. You can read them out loud or read them silently, and just ask yourself, who in my earliest life had those qualities and characteristics? It is really important that you look at that by yourself, and at the end I'll give you a little idea about that. So when I say we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves, there is a very important thing you have to think of. The most important thing is that you are no longer God. If you're a drug addict, your drugs are God. My drugs were my God. I was my God. I did whatever I want, whenever I wanted, regardless of how other people were affected. So the only thing you have to know is you are not God. You cannot be God. A God has to be a higher power. It can be a 12-step group. It can be a religion. It can be a feeling that you have when you get that joggers or that biker's high. That can be what you consider a higher power. What you feel when you're in nature, if you're a nature lover, that can be where you feel this auspicious, tremendous, magnificent feeling, and that can be your higher power. When you're around animals, if you're an animal lover, what you feel when you're with dogs or cats or your pets, that unconditional love. That's what my first higher power in the program was unconditional love. That was the only way I could relate to a higher power. So along with nature, higher learning. When I read psychiatric novels, when I read psychiatric journals and books, it really makes me feel excited. I feel like I am thoroughly enjoying learning, and higher learning gives me this feeling of being connected to the universe, and I love to learn. So it can be higher learning. It can be anything that gives you that connection. I have a client who is an excellent hairdresser, and that art, that she creates, that creativity is like the higher power. The universe can be the higher power. It can be anything except you. And then if you're having a problem with a conflict or something like that, you imagine taking it up to an altar and taking that conflict or that problem to the altar and turning your life and your will over. Now, at this point, you have hopefully decided that your higher power is extremely loving, very forgiving, all inclusive, really, really loves you, wants the best for you, wants to help you, those kinds of things. So you go from the negative characteristics to creating what you really want in a higher power. And what is, for me, of course, I created the ideal therapist and the ideal parents. I put those together, and that was my higher power. And my higher power had those characteristics because they were so important to me. So put down on your list of positive characteristics what is the most important thing for you on having a higher power. Now, you notice I'm not saying God because yours may not be God. It may be a little bit different, and that's important. You need to relate to it. Some people use a 12-step group. Some people use their church. Some people use gospel music or hymnal music and how it makes them feel. Art and creativity can definitely be a higher plane. So basically, it's a spiritual plane. It's a higher plane than our everyday plane. And it tends to use a bunch of parts of the brain together that connect and make us have spiritual experiences. And sometimes when people take a third step, they will have an immediate conversion experience. I was an atheist, and my third step created this intensely overwhelming sense of true, genuine love and forgiveness for me and for what I did when I was doing drugs, and that it just rolled and rolled and rolled inside me and around me for hours until I woke up in the morning and it was still there. And it was just my experience, I truly believe, of God saying, I've been waiting for you. I'm here, and I'm everything you thought. I mean, I get chills as I think about it. I'm everything you wanted: a higher power, ideal parents, ideal therapist. And it turned out to be very true. I had to go through tragedy in recovery, and I held on barely. It was severe major depression. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God would carry me through it, even though I didn't feel better for quite a long time. But that faith and that belief, thank goodness I didn't have that early on. I couldn't have handled it. And that faith and belief and the experience over and over and over of having experiences with my higher power that reaffirmed that he was there and that I was being taken care of. And I worked very hard to take care of myself. I had sort of relationship addiction in the beginning of recovery. I was 24, and I spent a lot of time going to therapy and not dating for a couple of years, more than a couple, I think. So I really worked hard on myself. I didn't expect my higher power to be Santa Claus. I had to work, and as long as I stayed on my path, I would get little teeny weeny awards, visions, something with an animal. Like when I was severely depressed, I saw a dragonfly. To me, that was a message from God, and it just helped me lift myself up a little bit. Little teeny things that were strange coincidences, very difficult to say that they were statistically easy to achieve, that happened to me, that made me feel that love and that being taken care of, and the unconditional love in that experience. So the third step actually is when, if you've been in a fundamentalist church and you're Christian, the first three steps are a lot like the salvation steps. I believe that I'm a sinner. Yes, I am a sinner. Number two, I don't know, I wasn't fundamentalist. I think number two is I believe that God can help me, and then I turn my life and my will over to Jesus usually. And many people then do have a conversion experience right there, like I did in my bedroom, and they will have like being slain in the spirit and an absolutely beautiful experience. And you can be in church and watch it sometimes. So it really is up to you. I know that gospel music is one of the ways that I feel connected to my higher power. Animals, nature, intimate conversations with close friends and my husband, I feel connected to God, those kinds of things. So hopefully that helps you. And we're come to the end of our time. This is Susie Marsh, LCSW. See you next week. Bye.